The gradual drip feed of information regarding anything and everything Armored Core 6 continues, and today we got it in the form of a brand new interview from Japanese website Famitsu.com. Famitsu interviewed Armored Core 6 producer Yasunori Ogura, and in that brief interview they touch on all kinds of things that we've been wondering. Does the game have heat management? What happens when you fall? What's that charge shot attack about? The list goes on, so we'll get into it. But before we do, just a little disclaimer that the interview in question was conducted in Japanese, and so it is translated. There's a lot of spots that don't have a necessarily 100% smooth translation, and so take it a little bit with a grain of salt, but I think we can definitely get what they mean. Famitsu starts the interview by talking about the presentation at the Summer Games Fest, asking Ogura that even though the presentation was at a limited venue for overseas media, did he feel the enthusiasm and the anticipation for the game? Ogura responds that he was a little bit nervous at first showing the actual game screens for the first time, but that he's glad that many people in the media listened intently to the contents of his work and have high expectations for it. Famitsu goes on to ask that in the presentation, you can move while boosting, and if you keep boosting, you can fly. I think it depends on assembly, but how long does the boost gauge last? Ogura responds that it's an element unique to the Armored Core series. Therefore, how much you can boost varies greatly depending on your assembly. For example, if you have a lightweight frame configuration and fuel-efficient boosters that consume a small amount of energy, you can stay in the air for a long time. On the other hand, AP, or your armor points, what effectively serves as the HP for your mech, and the load capacity for weapons will decrease. And there's not a whole lot new there, it's all very typical of the series. Though it is nice that he confirms that if you have a lightweight craft, you can fly for a long time. Famitsu goes on to say that the inside of the megastructure is very large, and it seems like you can go anywhere. Of course, I think that there are places you can't enter, but basically, can you go to any place such as visible buildings and objects? And Ogura responds that since it's positioned as a reboot for Armored Core, that they dare to follow the traditional mission system of the series, and unlike Elden Ring, it's not an open field stage. So you can't access everything you see, but that we've prepared a field where you can take advantage of the dynamic movement of the mecha. So again, maybe not a whole lot of new information in that. We already knew that it was going to have large level layouts, and it's expected since it's not open world that you can't just keep going indefinitely and get to anything that you can see. But up next is our first real piece of new information. Famitsu asks, beneath the megastructure looks like a pitfall. What happens if you fall? Ogura responds, if you fall, you will be out of the operation area, and you can immediately restart from the place just before the fall, but with your AP reduced. And this is interesting, as it's something entirely new to the series. Previously, there were some spots that you could fall, but once you exited the operation area, that was it. You failed the mission. But now, at least when falling in a pit, you just restart with less AP. What they don't specify here is horizontal and vertical operation areas, as those have always existed too, and I have to imagine that they still do. Even though it sounds like we get a lot more verticality in this game, I think in order to prevent players from kind of cheesing the top of the map, you would either have to be really clever with your map design, really balanced with your energy and booster features, or you'd have to put an upper limit on the operation area. Same goes for the horizontal if you don't want every mission area to either be entirely inside somewhere, or roughly an island where you just can't get off of anyway. So I think in that respect, operation areas, both vertical and horizontal, does allow for more unique level design. The question is, will going out of those end in mission failure? Will you restart at the last checkpoint? Or will it do like this, and drop your AP and just pop you back to somewhere right before you exited? But moving on, Famitsu asked, is it possible to scan with one button without going into a mode change? Also, does scanning performance change depending on the head parts? And Ogura responds, yes, you can search the surroundings with a single button, instead of the mode change that was in the Armored Core 5 series. Also, the distance that can be scanned differs depending on the head part. Scans can be used at any time, except during reloads, and there is no limit to the number of scans. So we do get a look at the scanning in the gameplay featured at the Summer Games Fest, and I think this is pretty in line with what we expected. It makes sense for the scanning feature to be controlled primarily by your head part, and it did seem to be just a single button event that happens, rather than having to shift into a scan mode like in the 5th gen. I think the one piece of this that I'm actually curious about is when he talks about not being able to scan during reloads. Now, considering you have give or take 4 active weapons at any time, you'll most likely be reloading your weapons a lot. On top of that, I don't know how it makes sense for your head just not to be able to scan while you're reloading, say, your missile pods or your rifle, for example, and that leads me to believe that this isn't talking about reloading your weapons. I think this is talking about the resupply points, where you get to refill your ammo and health charges. But if that's actually the case, it's a little bit interesting in that why wouldn't you be able to scan while you are doing that? The only reasons that I can think of is that it does take some sort of time frame to resupply, that potentially it's not a forced event and it's something that you do manually, and that other events, such as being ambushed, can happen while you're resupplying. Famitsu goes on to ask a question that I know I was definitely curious about. They say, in the assembly scene, you can see the parameters of the parts, but does this game use a heat management system like the one used in the days of Armored Core Nexus? And this is something that myself and a lot of other people have been speculating on, as to how this heat system works when we first saw it in the gameplay footage. And there's a Reddit AMA with From Chang who did get to see the press release where he talks about the heat system in regards to melee weapons. And he says that melee weapons specifically seem to have a heat gauge and that they could actually overheat and prevent you from using them for a short duration, but that it was hard to tell in any detail how the mechanic really worked. But in response to this question, Ogura says, no, we don't have a heat management system like Armored Core Nexus. The names of the parameters in the assembly scene that you saw in this hands-off demo are still under development, and that we are in the process of making adjustments to make them more intuitive. Which to me just means that From Ching is probably right on and that it involves the cooldown of at least your melee weapon, most likely some other aspects as well, but that it isn't actually what we'd consider a heat management system and more of a cooldown related system. And so we don't know if we'll end up with the same name or not, but they're looking to make it something more intuitive, since obviously it's caused a little bit of confusion among fans. And that's one of the big goals they set out to do in this game, is make the explanation of things, how parts work and function, and the stats among them, just more intuitive and easy to understand for new people coming into the series. Next, Famitsu asked, there is a scene where you shoot a rifle-like weapon with a firm stance. Is this a button press shot? And here, you can be fairly sure that they're referring to that charge-up attack of that orange AC, and even though the wording's a little bit weird, they just want to know how that fire functions, since we see them both shoot at more rapid fire as well as a long-duration charge-up attack. Ogura responds, yes, that's a weapon category called a linear rifle, and you can boost the electromagnetic acceleration of the bullet with a button press. In addition, there are many other weapons that can be charged to improve attack power or impact power, or to change the performance or the actions. And this is once again at least confirmation of what we're sort of all thinking, that this was a charged up version of its regular shot that did increased damage or stagger. We also see the ability to charge weapons in the form of the laser dagger. After it does its quick combo, you get this big sweeping slash. And though charged attacks aren't necessarily something new to the series, they've been incredibly rare in the past, focusing primarily on things like Kojima weapons. And I'm definitely excited for the ability to charge up weapons. It'll most likely be mostly linear rifles or energy weapons, probably not a whole lot in the solid weapons, and maybe that'll be one of the defining characteristics between the two. But I'm also super interested in this change performance or actions. Is this just referring to the melee weapons and the ability to have that single charged up attack towards the end? Or are there guns with alternate fires too? That would be my guess. Even if they're solid shell weapons and not charged energy weapons, there could be alternate fires like quick burst with less accuracy, things like that. It certainly opens up a lot of possibilities. In a related question, Famitsu asks, in the play demo, the tip of the linear rifle is filled with something like energy, and you're shooting from the kick. It seemed like a combination of kicking while charging and shooting, or so-called combo. But is it possible for the player to create many such combos? And in this question, they're talking about that part of the gameplay footage where we see the RNJC charging its right-hand linear rifle, kick the quad leg, causing it to stagger, and then shooting it with the linear rifle, causing it to stagger again. Which of course they follow up with a lot of blade attacks and missiles to finish it off. Ogura responds that in the video he uses assault boost to approach the enemy quickly, then kicks the enemy, followed by a charged attack with the linear rifle in his right hand. In this way, you can combine various attack methods, so I hope you enjoy creating your own coordinated attack patterns. And it's definitely nice that they confirm you can charge weapons, and in the very least use your kick. We don't know if you can charge and say use your left arm blade or not, but we do know that you can kick. And just that ability by itself, along with other weapons being able to perform charged attacks, should open up a lot of possibilities in the form of different combos you can make. Famitsu goes on to ask, the blade attack seems to be divided into triple slashes and heavy slashes, but is this also a charged attack? Ogura responds with, yes, it is. I would be happy if you could build your own original cooperative attack by incorporating it into your own playstyle, including how to use weapons with multiple attack patterns in this kind of situation. So it's just him confirming that yes, the large melee attacks are indeed a form of charged attack, and then just hoping you find an interesting way to work these into your playstyle. Famitsu wraps it up here, saying expectations have risen even more with this specific gameplay footage. There are various considerations among users, but please give us a message for the users' expectations. Ogura thanks them for watching the gameplay video, and talks about how what he showed off was a coordinated attack consisting of a linear rifle charge shot, a kick followed up by multiple blade attacks, a salvo of plasma missiles, and then a charged blade attack. By devising a combination of the 4 weapons on both hands and shoulders, it is possible to create more complex cooperation than what is shown this time. In this game, you can fight in a way that is unique to you. One interesting thing to note here, and it's hard to tell if it's just his wording or it's something lost in translation, but Ogura does talk about the 4 weapons in both hands and shoulders. But what he doesn't mention here is the expansion slots, and while we're fairly sure that they hold assault armor, we don't actually know if they have any attached weapons, like missile extensions, rockets, buckshot, mines, or any other weapons that we've seen historically throughout the series. And while I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is confirmation of that, just an interesting little tidbit. Ogura wraps it up saying that we want you to use your ingenuity to find your own victory patterns in aggressive and intense battles that make the most of your assemblies and how they behave, what kind of attacks you'll launch, and with what kind of weapons. We would like to continue to provide you with various information, so please look forward to it. And there you have it. A little bit of new information, confirming a few things, and fleshing out a few things we had questions on. Of course, there's still tons of questions we have, and they didn't go super in-depth into any one aspect. But it does sound like we'll be getting some more information before the release. So until then, I'll see you next time.